Chapter 10: A Lesson in Biology. Matilda on macro personal note. My debrief was also tape recorded as a backup, and to add clarification to the stenographic notes, I debriefed immediately after my interview, so that everything that I said was still fresh in my mind. When I recorded these stories to the gallery stenographer, I was still reeling a bit. The perspective on Earth history from the point of view of the domain is very strange, to say the least. I wasn't sure if my uncomfortable feeling came from being disoriented or if it came from being oriented. Either way, I felt unsteady and confused, yet at the same time, there was a ring of truth to it. I was elated and incredulous at the same time. The stenographer looks askance at me, mouth on. A few times as she recorded the history lesson, I passed on to her. I'm sure she thought I was losing my mind. Maybe she was right. However, if my mind been filled with hypnotic suggestions and false memories by the old empire, as Arrow suggested, perhaps losing my mind would be a good idea. I didn't have much time to ponder my own personal thoughts about these things at the time. It was my duty to get all of the information I could from Errol and pass it on to the stenographer as soon as Errol was finished. My job was not to analyze the information, just report it as accurately as possible. The analysis would be left to the men in the gallery, or whomever else was receiving copies of the transcripts. I also delivered a list of books and materials requested by Errol to the agent in the gallery room, so these could be gathered and delivered to Errol. Each night after I left Errol, she spent the rest of the night reading or scanning the materials which have been delivered to her. The members of the gallery each received a transcript of the stenographic dictation to study, each looking for information that was of interest to them. In the morning after breakfast, I report back to the interview room to continue my interviews or lessons with Errol. Official transcript of interview. Top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army, Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, 509th Bomb Group, Subject Talent Interview, 28/7/1947, First Session. The origins of this universe and life on Earth, as discussed in the textbooks I have read, are very inaccurate. Since you service your government as a medical personnel, your duties require that you understand biological entities, so I'm sure that you will appreciate the value of the material I will share with you today. The textbooks I have been given on subjects related to the function of life forms contain information that is based on false memories, inaccurate observation, missing data, unproven theories, and superstition. For example, just a few hundred years ago, your physicians practiced bloodletting, footnote 188, as means to release supposed ill humors from the body and an attempt to relieve or heal a wide variety of physical and mental affliction. Alright, these have been corrected somewhat. Many barbarisms are still being practiced in the name of medical science, in addition to the application on incorrect theories concerning biological engineering. Many primary errors that earth scientists make are the result of an ignorance of the nature and relative importance of its beast as a source of energy and intelligent with animate, very life form. Alright, it is not priority of the domain to intervene of the affairs of Earth. The Domain Communication Office has authorized me to provide you with some information in an effort to provide a more accurate and complete understanding of these things, and thereby enable you to discover more effective solution to the unique problems you face on Earth. The correct information about the origins of biological entities has been erased from your mind, as well as from the minds of your mentors. In order to help you regain your own memory, I will share with you some factual material concerning the origin of biological entities. I asked Errol if she was referring to the subject of evolution. Errol said, "No, not exactly. You will find evolution mentioned in the ancient Vedic hymns, footnote 189. The Vedic text, and like folk tales or common wisdom and superstitions gathered throughout the systems of the domain, these were compared into verses, like a book of rhymes. For every statement of truth, the verses contain as many half-truths, reversals of truth and fanciful imaginings, blended without qualification or distinction. The theory of evolution assumes that the motivation source of energy that animates every life form does not exist. It assumes that inanimate object or a chemical concoction can suddenly become alive or animate accidentally or spontaneously, or perhaps an electrical discharge into a pool of chemical ooze where magical spawn a self-animated entity. There is no evidence whatsoever that this is true, simply because it is not true. Dr. Frankenstein did not really resurrect the dead into a moronic monster, except in the imagination of the SP, who wrote a fictitious story, One Dark and Stormy Night, footnote 190. No wisdom scientist ever stopped to consider who, what, where, when, or how this animation happens. Complete ignorance, denial, or unawareness of the spirit of the sources of life force required inanimate object or cellular tissue is a sole cause of failures in Western medicine. In addition, evolution does not occur accidentally. It requires a great deal of technology, which must be manipulated under the careful supervision of its bees. Very simple examples are seen in the modification of farm animals or in the breeding of dogs. However, the notion that human biological organisms evolved naturally from earlier ape-like forms is incorrect. No physical evidence will ever be uncovered to substantiate the notion that modern humanoid bodies evolved on this planet. The reason is simple. The idea that human bodies evolved spontaneously from the primordial laws of chemical interactivity in the dim mist of time is nothing more than a hypnotic lie instilled by the amnesia operation to prevent your recollection of the true origins of mankind. Actually, humanoid bodies have existed in various forms throughout the universe for trillions of years. This was compounded by the fact that the Vedic hymns were brought to Earth 8,200 years ago by the Daman Expeditionary Force. While they were based in the Himalaya mountains, the verses were taught the some of the local humans who memorized them. However, I should note that this was not an authorized activity for the crew of the domain installation. Alright, I'm sure it seemed like an innocent diversion for them at the time. The verses were passed along verbally from one generation to the next for thousands of years in their foothills and eventually spread throughout India. No one in the domain credits any of the material in the Vedic hymns as factual material, any more that you will use Grimm's fairy tales, footnote 191, as a guide for reading children. However, on a planet where all other species have had their memory erased, one can understand how these tales and fancies could be taken seriously. Unfortunately, the humans who learned the Vedic verses passed to them along to others, saying that they came from the gods. Eventually, the content of the verses were adopted verbatim as truth. The euphemistic and metaphorical content of the Veda will accept and practiced as dogmatic fact. The philosophy of the verses were ignored, and the verses become the genesis of nearly every religion's practice on the planet, especially Hinduism. Footnote 192. As an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain, I was always assume a very pragmatic point of view. I cannot be effective or accomplish my missions if I were to use philosophical dogma or rhetoric as my operations manual. Therefore, our discussion of history is based on actual events that occurred long before any species arrived on Earth and long before the old empire came into power. I can relate part of this history for personal experience. Many billions of years ago, I was a member of a very large biological laboratory in a galaxy far from this one. It was called the Arcadia Regeneration Company. Footnote 193. I was a biological engineer working with a large staff of technicians. It was our business to manufacture and supply new life forms to uninhabited planets. There were millions of star systems with millions of inhabitable planets in the region at that time. There were many other biological laboratory companies at that time also. Each of them specialized in producing different kinds of life forms, depending on the class of the planet being populated. Over a long span of time, these laboratories developed a vast catalog of species throughout the galaxies. The majority of basic genetic material is common to all species of life. Footnote 194. Therefore, most their work was concerned with manipulating alterations of the basic genetic pattern to produce variations of life forms that would be suitable inhabitants for various planetary classes. The Arcadia Regeneration Company specialized in mammals for forested areas and birds from tropical regions. Our marketing staff negotiated contracts with various planetary governments and independent buyers from all over the universe. The technicians created animals that are compatible with the variations in climate, atmospheric, and terrestrial density and chemical content. In addition, we were paid to integrate our specimens with biological organisms originated by other companies already living on the planet. In order to do this, our staff was in communication with other companies who created life forms. There were industry trade shows, publications, and a variety of other information supplied through an association that coordinated related projects. As you can imagine, our research required a great deal of interstellar travel to conduct planetary surveys. This is when I learned my skills as a pilot. The data gathered was accumulated in huge computer databases and evaluated by biological engineers. Footnote 195. A computer is an electronic device that serves an artificial brain on complex calculating machine. It is capable of storing information, making computations, solving problems, and performing mechanical functions. It most of the galactic system of the universe. Very large computers are commonly used to run to the routine administration, mechanical services, and maintenance activities on an entire planet or planetary system. Based on a survey data gathered, designs and artistic renderings were made for new creatures. Some designs were sold to the highest bidder. All the life forms were created to meet the customized requests of our clients. The designs and technical specifications were passed along in assembly line to a series of cellular, chemical, and mechanical engineers to solve the various problems. It was their job to integrate all of the component factors into a workable, functional, and aesthetic finished product. Prototypes of these creatures were then produced and tested in artificially created environments. Imperfections were worked out. modifications made, and eventually the new life forms once endowed or animated with a life force of spiritual energy before being introduced into the actual planetary environment for the final testing. After a new life form was introduced, we monitored the interaction of these biological organisms with the planetary environment and with other indigenous life forms. Conflicts resulting from the interaction between incompatible organisms were resolved through negotiation between ourselves and other companies. The negotiations usually resulted in compromises requiring further modification to our creatures or to theirs or both. This is part of a science or article eugenics. Footnote 196. In some cases, changes were made in a planetary environment, but not often, as planet building is much more complex than making changes to an individual life form. Coincidentally, a friend and engineer with whom I used to work with the Arcadia Regeneration Company a long time after I left the company, told me that one of the projects they contract to do in more recent time was to deliver life forms to Earth to replenish them after a war in this region of the galaxy. Devastate most of the life of the planets in this region of space. This would have been about 70 million years ago. The skill required to modify the planet into an ecologically interactive environment that will support billions of diverse species was an immense undertaking. Specialized consultants from nearly every biotechnology company in the galaxy were brought in to help with the project. What you see now on Earth is the huge variety of life forms left behind. You scientists believe that the Fallacians theory of evolution is an explanation for the existence of all the life forms here. The truth is that all life forms on this and any other planet in this universe were created by companies like ours. How else can you explain the millions of completely divergent and unrelated species of life on the land and in the oceans of this planet? How else can you explain the sources of spiritual animation which defines every living creature? To say it is the work of God is far too broad. Every species have many names and faces, and many times and places. Every species is a god. When they inhabit a physical object, they are the source of life. For example, there are millions of species, footnote 197, of insects. About 350,000 of these are species of beetles, footnote 198. There may be as many as 100 million species of life forms on Earth at any given time. In addition, there are many times more extinct species of life on Earth than there are living life forms. Some of these will be rediscovered in the fossil or geological records of Earth. The current theory of evolution of life forms on Earth does not consider the phenomena of biological diversity. Evolution by natural selection in science fiction. One species did not accidentally or randomly evolve to become another species, as the Earth's textbooks indicate, without manipulation or genetic material by NXB. Footnote 199. A simple example of SB intervention in the selective breeding of the species, footnote 200, on Earth. Within the past few hundred years, several hundred dogs breeds, and hundreds of varieties of pigments and dozens of koi fish have been evolved in just a few years, beginning with only one original breed. Without active intervention by species, biological organisms rarely change. The development of an animal, like the duck-billed platypus, required a lot of very clever engineering to combine a body of a beaver with the bill of a duck and make a mammal that lays eggs. Undoubtedly, some wealthy client placed a special order for it as a gift or curious amusement. I'm sure that the laboratory of some biotechnical company worked on it for years to make it a self-replicating life form. The notion that the creation of any life form could have resulted from a coincidental chemical interaction moldering up from some primordial ooze is beyond absurdity. Factually, some organisms on Earth, such as proteobacteria, footnote 201, are modification of a phylum, footnote 202, designed primarily for star-type 3, class C planets. In other words, the domain designation for a planet with an anaerobic atmosphere nearest a large, intensely hot blue star, footnote 203, such as those in the constellation of Orion's belt in this galaxy. Creating life forms is very complex, highly technical work for species who specialize in this field. Genetic anomalies are very baffling to us biologists who have had their memory erased. Unfortunately, the false memory implantation of the old empire prevent Earth scientists from observing obvious anomalies. The greatest technical challenge of biological organisms of the invention of self-regeneration or sexual reproduction. It was invented as a solution to the problem of having to continually manufacture replacement creatures, for those had been destroyed and eaten by other creatures. Planetary governments did not want to keep buying replacement animals. The idea was contrived thrillers of years ago, as a result of a conference held to resolve arguments between the disputing vested interests within the biotechnology industry. The infamous Council of Yumi Kram was responsible for coordinating creature production. Footnote 204. A compromise was reached after certain members of the council were strategically bribed or murdered to alter an agreement which resulted in the biological phenomenon which we now call the food chain. The idea that a creature would need to consume the body of another life form as an energy source was offered as a solution by one of the biggest companies in the biological engineering business. They specialized in creating insects and flowering plants. The connection between the two is obvious. Nearly every flowering plant requires a symbiotic relationship with an insect in order to propagate. The reason is obvious. Both the bugs and the flowers were created by the same company. Unfortunately, this same company also had a division which created parasites and bacteria. The name of the company, roughly translated into English, would be Bugs in Blossoms. They wanted to justify the fact that the only valid purpose of the parasitic creatures to manufactured was to aid the decomposition of organic material. There was a very limited market for such creatures at that time. In order to expand their business, they hired a big public relations firm and a powerful group of political lobbyists. They glorified the idea that life forms should feed from other life forms. They invented a scientific theory to use as a promotion gimmick. The theory was that all creatures needed to have food as a source of energy. Before that, none of the life forms being manufactured required any external energy. Animals did not eat other animals for food, but consumed sunlight, minerals on vegetable matter only. Of course, Bugs and Blossoms went into the business of designing and manufacturing carnivores. Before long, so many animals were being eaten as food that the problem of replenishing them became very difficult. Of a solution Bugs and Blossoms proposed, with the help of some strategically placed bribes, in high places, that other companies began using sexual reproduction as the basis for replenishing life forms. Bugs and Blossoms was the first company to develop blueprints from sexual reproduction, of course. As expected, the patent licenses from the biological engineering process for Note 205 required to implant stimulus response mating, cellular division, and pre-programmed growth patterns for self-regenerating animals were earned by Bugs and Blossoms too. For the next few million years, laws were passed that required that these programs be purchased by the other biological technology companies. These were required to be imprinted the cellular design of all existing life forms. It became a very expensive undertaking for other biotechnology companies to make such an awkward and impractical idea work. This led to the corruption and downfall of the entire industry. Ultimately, the food and sex idea completely ruined the biotechnology industry, including Bugs and Blossoms. The entire industry faded away as the market for manufactured life forms disappeared. Consequently, when a species became extinct, there was no way to replace them, because the technology of creating new life forms has been lost. Obviously, none of this technology was ever known on Earth, and probably never will be. There are still computer files on some planets far from here with record to procedures for biological engineering. Possibly the laboratories and computers still exist somewhere. However, there is no one around doing anything with them. Therefore, you can understand why it's so important for the domain to protect the dwindling number of creatures left on Earth. The core concept behind sexual reproduction technology was the invention of the chemical electronic interaction called cyclical stimulus response generators. Footnote 206. This is a programmed genetic mechanism which causes a seemingly spontaneous, recurring impulse to reproduce. The same technique was later adapted and applied to biological flesh bodies, including Homo sapiens. Another important mechanism used in the reproductive process, especially with Homo sapiens type bodies, is the implantation of a chemical electrical trigger mechanism, footnote 207, in the body. The trigger which attracts its bees to inhabit a human body on any kind of flesh body. If the use of artificially imprinted electronic wave which uses static pain to attract the SB. Every trap in the universe, including those used to capture SBs who remain free, is baited with an static electronic wave. The sensation caused by the static wavelength are more attractive to an SB than any other sensation. When the electronic waves of pain and beauty are combined together, this causes the SB to get stuck in the body. The reproductive trigger used for lesser life forms, such as cattle and other mammals, and triggered by chemicals emitted from the scent glands, combined with the reproductive chemical electrical impulses stimulated by testosterone or estrogen. Footnote 208. There's also interactive with nutrition levels, which cause the life form to reproduce more when deprived of food sources. Starvation promoted reproductive activity as a means of perpetuating survival for future regenerations. When the current organism fails to survive, these fundamental principles have been applied throughout all species of life. The debilitating impact, in addition the sexual and aesthetic pain, electronic wave, footnote 209, is the reason that the ruling class of the domain do not inhabit flesh bodies. This is also why officers of the domain forces only use doll bodies. This wave was proven to be the most effective trapping device ever created in the history of the universe, as far as I know. The civilization of the domain and the old empire both depend on this device to recruit and maintain a workforce of bees who inhabit flesh bodies on planets and installations. These bees are the working class, beings who do all of the slavish, manual, undesirable work on planets. As I mentioned, there is a very high regiment and fixed hierarchy or class system for all bees throughout the old empire and the domain as follows. The highest class are free bees, that is, they are not restricted to the use of any type of body and may come and go at will, provided that they don't destroy or interfere with the social, economic, or political structure. Below this class, a many strata of limit bees who may or may not use their body from time to time. Limitations are imposed on each bee regarding range of power, ability, and mobility they can exercise. Below these are the dual body classes, to which I belong. Nearly all space officers and crew members of spacecraft are required to travel through intergalactic space. Therefore, they are each equipped with the body manufactured for lightweight, durable material. Various body types have been designed to facilitate specialized functions. Some bodies have accessories, such as interchangeable tools or operators, for activities such as maintenance, mining, chemical management, navigation, and so forth. There are many gradations of this body type, which also serve as an insignia of rank. Below this are the soldier class. The soldiers are equipped with a myriad of weapons and specialized armaments designed to detect, combat, and overwhelm any imaginable foe. Some soldiers are issued mechanical bodies. Most soldiers are merely remote-controlled robots with no class designation. The lower class are limited to flesh bodies. Of course, it is not possible for these to travel through space for obvious reasons. Fundamentally, flesh bodies are far too fragile to endure the stresses of gravity, temperature extremes, radiation exposure, atmospheric chemicals, and the vacuum of space. There are also the obvious logistical inconvenience of food, defecation, sleep, atmospheric elements, and air pressure required by flesh bodies that dull bodies do not require. Most flesh bodies will suffocate in only a few minutes without a specific combination of atmospheric chemicals. After 2 or 3 days, the bacteria, which live internally and externally on the body, cause severe odors to be emitted. Odors of any kind are not acceptable in a space vessel. Flesh can tolerate only a very limited spectrum in temperatures, whereas in space the contrast of temperatures may vary hundreds of degrees within seconds. Of course, flesh bodies are utterly useless for military duty. A single shot from a handheld electronic blast gun instantly turns a flesh body into a noxious vapor cloud. Bees who inhabit flesh bodies have lost much of their natural ability and power. Alright, it is theoretically possible to regain or rehabilitate these abilities. No practical means have been discovered or authorized by the domain. Even now, spacecraft of the domain travel trillions of light years in a single day, footnote 210. The time required to traverse the space between galaxies is significant, not to mention the length of time to complete just one set of mission orders, which may require thousands of years. Biological flesh bodies live for only a very short time, only 60 to 150 years at most, whereas dull bodies can be reused and repaired almost indefinitely. The first development of biological bodies began in this universe about 74 trillion years ago. It rapidly became a fad from species to create and inhabit various types of bodies for an assortment of nefarious reasons, especially for amusement. This is to experience various physical sensations vicariously through the body. Since that time, these have been a continuing devolution in the relationship of Isbis to bodies. As Isbis continued to play around with their bodies, certain tricks were introduced to cause Isbis to get trapped inside the body so they were unable to live again. This was done primarily by making bodies that appeared sturdy, but were actually very fragile. NSB, using their natural power to create energy, accidentally injured a body when contacting it. The SB was remorseful about having injured this fragile body. The next time they encountered a body, they began to be careful with them. In so doing, the SB would withdraw or minimize their own powers, so as not to injure the body. A very long and treacherous history of this kind of trickery, combined with similar misadventures, eventually result in a large number of species becoming permanently trapped in bodies. Of course, this has become a profitable enterprise for some species who took advantage of this situation to make slaves of others. The resolving enslavement progressed over trillions of years and continues today. Ultimately, the dwindling ability of species to maintain a personal state of operational freedom and ability to create energy resulted in the vast and carefully guarded hierarchy or class system. Using bodies as a symbol of each class is used throughout the old empire as well as the domain. The vast majority of species throughout the galaxy of this universe inhabit some form of flesh body. The structure, appearance, operation, and habitat of their bodies vary according to the gravity, atmosphere, and climatic conditions of the planet they inhabit. Body types are predetermined largely by the type and size of the star around which the planet revolves, the distance from the star, the geological as well as the atmospheric components of the planet. On the average, the stars and planets fall into gradients of classification with a fairly standard throughout the universe. For example, Earth is identified roughly as a Sun-type 12, class 7 planet. That is a heavy gravity, nitrogen, oxygen atmosphere planet, footnote 211, with biological life forms in proximity to a single, yellow medium-size, long radiation sun or type 12 star. The proper designations are difficult to translate accurately due to extreme limitation of astronomical nomenclature in the English language. There are many varieties of flame forms. There are grains of sands on the beach. You can imagine how many different creatures and types of bodies have been manufactured by the millions of companies, such as Bugs and Blossom, for all of the myriad planetary systems during a course of 74 trillion years. Matilda O'Donnell McElroy personal note. When Arrow finished telling me this story, there was a long, silent pause. When I muddled through all this in my mind, had Arrow been reading science fiction books and fantasy stories during the night, why would she tell me something so incredibly far-fetched? If that had not been a 40-inch tall alien with grey skin and 3 fingers on each hand, and foot sitting directly across from me, I would not have believed a single word of it. In retrospect, over the 6 years single Arrow gave me this information, Earth doctors have begun to develop some of the biological engineering technology that Arrow told me about right here on Earth. Height bypasses, cloning, test tube babies, organ transplants, plastic surgery, genes, chromosomes, and so forth. One thing is very sure, I had never looked at a bug or flower the same way since then, not to mention my religious belief in Genesis.